Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. Some of the most eerie, interesting, and haunting stories I have come across often don't appear that way at first. And that is certainly the case for the story I'm going to share with you in this episode. But to set the scene, I would like to tell you a story about my grandma. She was a quilter. She would work in her basement on these big quilting frames, and growing up, I never remember a time I did not have a quilt that she made for me on my bed. But as a kid, there are a lot of things you don't fully appreciate. The nuances and the pure poetry of life. I loved slipping under that blanket, and I used it until it literally fell apart. While it was such a constant presence in my life, I rarely thought about the tremendous amount of work, artistry, and love involved with making it for me. As an adult, I was gifted another beautiful quilt, and now, in the many years since she left us, I look at it in such a different way. It is not just a blanket, but a living memory, an artifact of her care and hopes for me, a handmade love letter I can wrap myself in when the nights get long or scary, or a grandma's hug is desperately needed. But what happens when an object that usually brings us happiness, comfort, and warmth instead causes us panic, terror, and fear? Up next, we examine the very unique and unsettling case of a haunted quilt and the family that tried to figure out what was going on. But before we get to that, our next tour to resume for the summer season is one of my all-time favorites, Ghosts of the Mackenzie King Estate in Gatineau Park. Mackenzie King was Canada's longest-serving Prime Minister, and while a reserved man in public, in private, he dabbled significantly with spiritualism, regularly conducting seances and working with mediums. We get the rare opportunity to bring guests to his country retreat for a walk under the moonlight as we share the supernatural side of his life and the ghost stories connected to the estate and surrounding area. Located deep within Gatineau Park, outside of Ottawa, and surrounded by the dark woods and spooky ruins that King collected, it almost feels like you get transported back in time. There is something magical about the whole experience. If you have not tried this tour yet, I would highly recommend you put it on your things to do list for this summer. You will not be disappointed. For our friends in Toronto, or anyone who will be visiting this summer, I want to remind you that Alone in the Dark at the Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre begins this weekend. Tickets are already going quickly, and with limited dates through August, I do want to be sure that Haunted Talks listeners don't miss out. For tickets or info on any of our many ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. Like many great haunted object stories, this one begins with a mystery. In 1955, William and Dora Monroe purchased a home and many of its furnishings in the small community of Poughkeepsie, Wisconsin. The previous owner, an older gentleman, had recently passed, and there was no immediate family to take over the property. The Monroes, on the other hand, had 9 children, and several of the younger ones were still living at home and moved with their parents to this new location. While exploring the house, in the back of a closet, they discovered a dusty old box that had seemingly been long ago forgotten. Inside, they found a neatly folded, colorful patchwork quilt. It was black, yellow, and red, stitched with yellow thread. It was a quilt for a double bed, and they thought it looked to be around 60 to 75 years old, which, if accurate, would date it roughly back to the 1870s or 80s. If you would like to see a black and white newspaper photo of Donna Monroe holding the quilt, I have posted it on this episode's page on our website. You can find that by visiting hauntedwalk.com/podcasts and looking for episode 159. They returned the quilt to the box, and there it waited for another 2 years. When one of the couple's grown daughters, Florence, was coming to stay for a night, Dora decided, as it was so beautiful and so old, it was a good opportunity to finally pull out the quilt and use it on a guest bed. Between midnight and 1 a.m., Florence was awakened by tugging motions on the quilt near the foot of the bed, as if someone was trying to pull it off her. She was too frightened to yell out, and she heard a voice clearly say, "Give me my Christmas quilt." Although she was terrified, she hung on for dear life in this tug-of-war for about 3 hours, until it finally stopped moving. As the story began to circulate, other members of the family wanted to come and see for themselves. The oldest daughter, Margaret, and her daughter spent a night under the quilt and also described strange events that started in the early morning hours. It suddenly started jerking from the foot of the bed and felt very heavy, as if it was trying to crush them, and hot, as if the heat came from an oven. The granddaughter claimed to hear the pulsing sound of a loud heartbeat, which one must wonder if it were her own, with everything that was going on. At this point, I'm sure some of us would decide enough was enough, and either put the quilt back in the box or throw it away altogether. But the family had other ideas, and like the best paranormal investigators, decided to perform an experiment. They sent the quilt with their granddaughter's boyfriend to his house to see if anything would happen there. I think this was a really inspired choice. On the show, you have often heard me mention how we wonder if places are haunted, things are haunted, or if people are haunted, or some combination of all of the above. The boyfriend lived 30 kilometers or 20 miles away from the Monroe home, which would eliminate the activity being potentially related to a haunted place. He had not personally experienced any of the activity connected to the quilt, or even spent time in its presence before it arrived at his house, which, along with having 3 other witnesses, would make it less likely that this is a case of a haunted person. If the unusual activity did occur, it seems like this could be a genuine haunted object. He was alone in the house that night, and after midnight was awakened when the quilt once again started moving. He got out of bed, sat in a chair watching it, and the quilt straightened itself out as if no one had slept in the bed. It was raining hard that night, and he must have jumped out of his skin when he heard an unexpected knock at the door. When he opened it, he saw a man with a farmer's hat on, with no face, and clothing completely dry despite the torrent of rain. The vicar turned and walked off into the darkness without speaking. The boyfriend got dressed and went out to look for the man, but could not find him, any footprints, or any trace of his existence. Could this have been the physical manifestation of the voice that demanded the return of the quilt? 2 Monroe grandsons also tried their own experiment one night. One would stay up to see what would happen, while the other slept under the quilt. Around 1 a.m., the watcher saw the blanket rise about 1 foot in the air above the sleeper, floating downwards toward the foot of the bed before it collapsed in a heap on the floor. The quilt was also sent to California to relatives there, who also reported it would move of its own accord. William, the patriarch of the family, was the last to use the quilt, and proved to be the bravest. He used it for 3 or 4 nights. It jerked and pulled each night, but he hung on to it. Finally, one night, he decided to let go to see what would happen. And part of the quilt slid off the bed and crawled under the dresser. During this time, the family attempted to find out more about the history of the quilt, hoping to understand what was happening. But given how old it was, and that the previous owner had passed without any immediate family, they found themselves at loose ends. This is when several neighbors came up with an amazing idea. They would perform their own paranormal investigation on the quilt. On Halloween night, 1963, 6 women would gather under and around the quilt, one of them equipped with a camera, standing by as a witness. From today's perspective, this might not seem like such a big deal. But for a group of women in the US Midwest in the 1960s to attempt an investigation like this was far from a common occurrence. I love their curiosity, ambition, and courage in facing the unknown. At the beginning of the investigation, those under the quilt felt a warm and prickly sensation, but laughed it off to their own imaginations. Nothing else happened that night. No photographs were taken. Interestingly, Dora Monroe cautioned the group that the quilt might not do anything because there were so many women present, and if the women were silly about it, it wouldn't work either. I wasn't surprised to read the investigation did not yield any dramatic results, because serious investigations rarely do. Something that has perhaps been a little lost due to the influence of paranormal television shows and YouTube videos is that when investigating, even the most haunted places, most of the time, nothing significant happens. Patience is perhaps the most important tool for an investigator. Ghosts or the supernatural can't be summoned or commanded for our entertainment, and there is no way to guarantee that something really exciting will happen when attempting to connect. If it did, it would sure make it a lot less interesting when something does occur. One concept we've been working with, especially with our Alone in the Dark experience at the Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre in Toronto, and our online Haunting at Home, is that the intention of those involved in an investigation seems to play an important role. When a group goes into an experience with a unified, open mind, an intent to make contact, and reaches out using all our senses to try to connect with the unseen world around us, in our experience, things do seem more likely to happen. Or as Dora Monroe said in 1963, if the women were silly about it, it wouldn't work either. While there seems to be several witnesses to the strange occurrences related to the quilt, a skeptic might point out that virtually all of these witnesses are family members or close relations. It is certainly possible that this was all a shared joke, perhaps even a prank played on Dora, who never witnessed any of the activity herself. Or perhaps, like with every family, some stories become more like legends and take on a life of their own and embellishments that compound with each retelling. Or perhaps it was the power of suggestion, and once the idea was planted that the quilt was haunted, the imaginations of those involved ran wild. We can't rule out any of these possibilities. For Dora Monroe, however, she chose to believe. As she told the Kenosha News, "I have to believe all these stories, as I don't know of any reason why these people would lie to me." I reached out to the family to try to track down where the blanket is now and if there have been any other strange events connected to it. As of yet, I have not heard back. If I do, I will be eager to share that update with you. I was able to find a comment made by someone who claimed to be part of the extended family. In 2021, they wrote that the blanket is still in Wisconsin, safely stored away in a box, making it a unique family legend and one heck of an heirloom. As you are tucking yourself into bed tonight and snuggling under the covers, maybe give this story a quick thought. Because you never know, even in our most comfy and peaceful places, there's always the possibility of an encounter with the unknown. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I would like to dedicate it to the memory of my grandma, Alice Howard. Do you have something unique in your family, like a haunted quilt? I would love to hear about it. Please feel free to reach out to me, jim@hauntedwalk.com. For information on our ghost tours, Alone in the Dark, and our online experiences, such as The Haunting at Home, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. Also be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for our latest news and updates. Right now, as the episode releases, we are running a contest for some handmade leather Haunted Walk bookmarks. So be sure to check on Facebook and Instagram on how to enter that giveaway. If you are enjoying our episodes, please be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. We always love hearing your thoughts and your feedback. A special shout out to our hardworking Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.